Hello, and welcome to another episode from Season 6 of The Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a passion for scary movies. Each week we pick a different horror movie and dissect it to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, how well it did, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season we're changing things up. We're devoting a whole season to reviewing Esquire's list of the 50 scariest movies of all time. In each episode, we'll break down a different movie, talk about how scary it really was, and then update our rankings to prove how much smarter we are than the other people on the internet. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the conversation. Had you ever heard of Carnival of Souls?
I haven't.
I hadn't either, but I'm kind of like getting a little obsessive with it.
Really?
Yeah, I really I enjoyed watching the movie, and I read a fair amount about it, and I really like a lot of the ways that it was made and kind of some of the background stuff of it.
Yeah.
But I also feel like it has a lot of weird ties to you and I personally. So, like, it might not have the same effect on other people, but from watching it and then reading about it after, it was just like one thing after another. And so I'm excited to talk about it with you. And I'm also excited because this is the first one from this list that I hadn't heard of that I really, really liked. So it's like it's finally kind of paying off a little bit.
Finally, at number 21, it paid off.
Yeah.
That's funny. But don't talk about the time that we were racing a group of girls in another car and we ran them off on a bridge.
I wasn't going to bring it up.
Oh, son of a...
Did you know that was actually filmed in Kansas? So that really could have been us coming back from a show late at night. Yeah.
4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah. Just played Manhattan again, and yeah.
Yeah.
Well, cool. I'll introduce it, and then we can get down to it. In 1962, Hertz Lion International Corp. Released Carnival of Souls, an independent horror movie written and directed by Herc Harvey. The plot follows a young woman who is the sole survivor of a car accident. She is an organist and tries to move on with her life after the tragic accident in which 2 of her friends died. As time goes on, though, she is plagued by visions of a ghostly man who seems to be following her, as well as a strange compulsion to visit an abandoned carnival site on the edge of town. This movie was made on a budget of about $30,000 and wasn't a huge hit at the time, but it has gained a cult following and was eventually remade in 1998. This movie can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
Exactly. So, if you got some cool facts, you should chime in too. The one I think I find the most interesting. Did you read the one about the bridge regarding the cost?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the damage to the bridge in the opening scene only cost $38 to the town of Lecompton, Kansas. They only required the railing of the bridge to be replaced, which I thought was incredibly nice of them.
Yeah,
also, like, man, you could have got some more money out of it.
Yeah.
$38.
Yeah, they basically went to the town and they're like, hey, we want to film this scene where a car goes flying off a bridge here. And the town was like, well, I mean, as long as you fix it, just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I'm surprised that we had never, like, made our way to Lecompton, Kansas. Just when it's between Topeka and Lawrence.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. And so, we were in that area all the time. If I'd known that was a town, I probably would have swung through.
We might have passed through it.
So, another fact that I thought was pretty interesting about this, when Harvey finished the film, he went back to his original work in making industrial and training films, traveling South America. Upon returning, he asked the film's distributor Hertz Lion for his royalty check. The check bounced and the distribution company folded in 1964.
Womp.
It's pretty sad.
Yeah.
I also read that because of like a failure to include like a copyright notice on the film's print, it automatically placed the picture into public domain in the United States.
Yeah.
Which for me is strange because I feel like we would have seen it. Like we would have watched it before if it's public domain, like just on TV or something,
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know, kind of interesting. So another fact about this. So a shot of the ghouls So there's a scene where they're rising out of the water. It was actually filmed in an apartment complex swimming pool near the director Harvey's house in Lawrence, Kansas.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. A lot of ties to Kansas in this. Another thing that's kind of cool is portions of the movie are tinted in a manner similar to silent films, which I think I noticed. I think I did. Whenever Mary is in one of her altered mental states, the picture has a faint cyan tint, while all the real scenes are in pure black and white. Later in the film, the tinted segments also have distorted sound and picture. Like I thought I noticed something, but I just thought it was like a black and white old movie screw up.
Mm-hmm.
And like there's a scene in a John Wayne movie where one of the guys is shooting a gun at a cactus and it like changes the texture and everything, and I just that's just a fuck up on their part, I assume. But
well, so
it's probably true.
I definitely didn't notice any change in the color, but I did notice when it became like really almost like ripply.
Right.
And I thought that it was supposed to be as if you were looking at them through water, like they were underwater or something, which would kind of fit with like the overall story. But yeah. I don't know if that was the intent or if it was just we need to do something to make the scene look weirder to emphasize what's happening.
Yeah, that's very true. Okay, last one. This is actually from IMDb, and most of them are. So Candice Hilligoss, main actress, it says that her agents refused to represent her any further after seeing the film.
Oh, wow.
Which I thought was interesting because I didn't think she did bad.
Well, was it that they weren't happy with her performance or that they thought the movie was too like lowbrow or something?
Well, I figured it would have to be performance because if they're the agent, they would have got her that gig.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So, anyway, so those are some of my facts.
Yeah.
About the film.
So, this movie, as far as like production and kind of how it was made and how it came across, and you got into it a little bit there, talking about it being black and white and them using kind of some effects to make some of the scenes seem a little different. I really, really liked the way the movie was presented, just from like a filming perspective. To me, it felt like a very extended episode of The Twilight Zone, which, I love, and that's one of my favorite shows of all time, and so anything that reminds me of that is something I'll generally like. But they also did a lot of what I thought were really creative things without a lot of budget. And so just even working in the fact that she played the organ for a living, but then a lot of the like creepy music or a lot of the music used to highlight the scary scenes or the tense scenes was also organ. Mm-hmm. So it kind of had like that that continuity a little bit. I thought was really cool because there was no reason they had to do that. But then the camera work I thought also was just awesome. I really liked the way they set up the shots. I really liked just the way that it was edited and one scene fed into the next. And then the more I read about that, the more it just like blew my mind. Because this movie was made on a very, very small budget. I mean, it was 100% an independent movie. The director had raised, I think, about $15,000 to $17,000, and then just got like investments from people around town for the rest of it in like $500 increments. And so that's how they were able to get up to $30,000. But they did not have, a full Hollywood special effects department. They didn't have a lot of professionals working on this. It was a lot of DIY type stuff. And so one thing that I had read about was they didn't use like the standard, the car stays stationary and they just move like pictures behind it. Mm-hmm. Like she was actually driving the car and they were filming from inside the car. Right. For a lot of it. So that scene where the face pops up outside and you see like that ghostly guy for the first time, they did that. They had to do that with mirrors. So they had to work out the mirrors and the camera all inside the car to make that happen. And so just like kind of the creativity of it and the willingness to like make those scenes happen given the limited resources that they had just really is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, it gives them so much more credit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, too, with this. Like at the beginning, the sound was a little weird and stuff like that. But I just kind of saw it as raw. Like, after knowing that, too, it's just like, like I almost respect them more for it. It's just like, you know, trying to do what they can with what they got.
Yeah. One thing that I think, you know, we kind of come back to, even with music, you know, film, anything artistic, is when you take whatever elements you have at your disposal and do something creative and interesting and different with it. Like, that's really something extra cool. And so even in this one, the way, you know, obviously they didn't have like a big sound budget, so they worked silence into the movie. Like, there were a major like plot point of the movie is she starts having these times where all of a sudden everything goes completely silent and people can't see her, and so they're just panning the camera around and you're seeing, you know, construction crews and cars and everything, but no sound is coming through, but you can still hear like her footsteps and stuff. That's really interesting because obviously all of those sounds when they filmed it were there, but then they just went back and added, you know, the sound of footsteps or whatever on it. But that's just such a creative use of what like limited materials they had at the time. Yeah. And so that's cool.
Yeah, it was definitely thinking outside the box. I mean, as far as trying to get all the sound to stop and add the shoes, a lot of things. So did you watch the preview for this movie?
No, I didn't.
So in the preview, it talks about it being an action-packed film. Well, and how I know, and like it shows like the scene of car going off the bridge. I mean, just think about like having a car like that where like no CGI, you were taking a car literally off a bridge.
Yeah, you kind of had one chance to make that work.
One chance, yeah. You would think it'd be like one chance or like 3 days to make it up or something, but it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess kind of to your point about it being not necessarily action-packed, I agree with you on that. I think that this was much more in the vein of like Psycho or one of the more sort of psychological horror type movies, in that it was more kind of that slow burn, but I felt like the pacing was still pretty good. Like they did a good job of like introducing, you know, new things to keep you on the edge of your seat or that you were trying to figure out or stay engaged with.
Yeah, it was one of those movies that like where it was just when it was starting to get boring for me, like maybe I think it was like 50 minutes in or so, they added, you know, a scene where she sees the guy who she's been seeing, like the main ghoul. Yeah, is she sees him in the hall, and like which was super creepy the way that was shot. Yeah, like it was shot almost like in the point of view you're watching her, like when she's in her bedroom. It's, you know, it's almost like you're watching her from kind of a lower angle, but they were able to kind of toss in those things to keep me interested.
And to me that felt very deliberate, because it seems like they would pull scenes along just long enough that you would start to let your guard down, so that when they did add something back in, it would hit extra hard. And so the best example of that for me is when she's in her car towards the beginning driving away, and you know, it's just like her in the car, and it's kind of, you know, she's looking in the rearview mirror and is driving, and it's nighttime, and you're like, okay, I get it. She's looking out the window. I get it. Oh, all of a sudden, creepy face. Like it came at exactly the right time, and it introduced a new element to what was going on beyond just, okay, well, she somehow survived the car crash that killed her friends and was the only one to walk away and then was acting weird afterwards. But now there's something else going on. There's this, maybe she didn't fully walk away from this thing. There's more to it. And I felt like the movie just did that sort of thing over and over, which I really liked.
Yeah. There's another scene when they're at the pavilion and it's being shot like she's being watched as well, which that kept me interesting as well. I mean, there's one thing about this movie. It may have flopped at the theater, but the amount of influences that this movie's had on other movies, I mean, it has to be, a ton. I mean, I'd be willing to bet that, Night of the Living Dead, this movie helped influence that, some of the scenes with that, as far as like the ghouls coming after them and aka zombies. But in like the slow, there was like that build up, like, so it wasn't all at once when you realized that like she couldn't hear anything. It was just kind of like all of a sudden she wasn't noticed. Then she wasn't noticed, and she could hear something. Before that, she was seeing the guy randomly show up, and you're like, is it just shock from the wreck, or what it was? So.
Yeah, and I kind of noticed some things in the other direction too, where like this movie was made by people that were fans of old horror movies. And one example of that was like when she is sitting there at the organ and it does the zoom in on her eyes, and it's just like her whole face is in shadow except for just her eyes, like in the classic Bela Lugosi Dracula.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool, how they worked that in. And then some of the makeup effects and stuff on the ghouls reminded me of kind of some of those older, like more classic horror movies as well.
Well, and it's also kind of, I think this is kind of crazy, for a movie that was out in 1962 and revolving around a woman who plays the organ at a church.
Yeah,
for her to be like
religious.
Yes, exactly. For her to not be religious at all.
Yeah,
like during that time period, like that just seems pretty uncanny. At the point, and I'm sure that there were protests on it and stuff, but yeah, it was just, it blew my mind, where it was just like, oh yeah, this is totally original. This isn't something that would happen for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I guess kind of in that same vein, there were several scenes with her like being in the church playing the organ, and then there's the one that I really liked where she's there and she's practicing, and then she's kind of like zoning out, and you see outside is the full moon, and then at the carnival or the pavilion, all of those like ghostly ghoul people come out of the water, and then they start dancing. And then you see the one guy that one guy who had been following her is alone, and then he starts walking toward her. But as that's all happening, her hands have kind of like taken on this weird, like kind of almost stiff, twitchy thing.
Yeah.
And she started playing like this really haunting sounding like carnival music. And then it's almost like she's in a trance, and you're super into like what's about to happen. And then it gets broken really hard by that priest coming in, who like gets onto her for playing non-church music in the church.
Right.
And I thought, gee, doesn't that sound familiar?
I know. Yeah. I almost got my ass kicked by a 50-year-old guy for playing Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, you about got kicked out of youth group for that. And then I remember there's one time I was playing Eye of the Tiger, and I got yelled at. Yeah. So this, for people listening, this is when we were like 13 playing in youth band at church. But yeah.
Play Stairway to Heaven, and then they told me to cut it out, and then I started playing Any Way You Want It, and like for sure got in trouble for that. But yeah, I mean that's what obviously I was thinking of at the same time, where like that guy got fired. He came in and like let her go because of it, and it's like, gosh, that's so crazy. Like it didn't sound, for me, it just sounded like a different style, but it didn't sound non-religious.
Well, but it was definitely not like traditional church organ music. So I could kind of see that. But
caught it.
But anyway, so Twilight Zone references, or Twilight Zone style, which I liked, and then getting in trouble for playing non-church music at church. And then the other thing that I thought was a weird intersection with us was finding out that a lot of the movie was filmed in Lawrence, Kansas. And with the last band that we played in together, we recorded an EP in Eudora, Kansas, which is right next door.
Yeah, right next door. This does have a lot of ties to us.
Yeah, and we played, I don't know, maybe... We played a lot of shows, not as many as some other places, but we played several shows in Lawrence.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we almost played in Kansas more than anywhere else.
Oh, we did. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we also, like, another ties, we spent a lot of our time just trying to get the hell out of Kansas.
Yeah, because we would go and we would play a show, and then it was, like, right on that border of being too far to drive home. But the other option would be, like, paying for a hotel and, music in the 2010s for non-pop acts doesn't pay anything. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like staying at someone's house they weren't too familiar with, and it's like, well, we're only 3 hours away. We can...
Yeah.
But I liked it. That's where we listened to the best music, and
we'd stay up late and talk football, horror movies, and music. I mean, that's kind of where all this started. So
pull into the house at 5 a.m. and breakfast, and then go bed.
Yep. The good old days.
Mm-hmm.
And then make yourself get up so that you could go to bed at a normal hour so you could get up for work on Monday. Yeah, that was rough. But So I guess the only negative thing I really had to say on this movie, or the only part that I didn't like, was she is staying with in almost like a short-term boarding house or something. So it's a lady that has a big house
It's
with
paid weekly.
It's what?
It's paid weekly.
Yeah. And so she's like renting out rooms in her house, and the main character is there, but then a guy is there as well, and he's creepy AF.
Yes, John Linden.
Yes, Mr. Linden.
Mm-hmm.
Hashtag never again. That dude was terrible. But the thing is, like, even in the 60s, Airbnbs were usually bad. So I feel like the movie ages well, but it just...
Yeah. I mean, the whole thing with John is the fact that, like, he was, like, super creep, super creep, super, like...
He's really handsy.
Really handsy, like, but also, like, what would you say? Like, where he's, like, almost begging. Like, he was almost desperate.
Yes.
Like, begging for it. And then, like, there's two things. One, when he goes to the bar and he's acting like he's talking to his buddy and acting like, she's mine, kind of like talking it up. And it's like, you were just begging her to go on a date, there. But then also, like, he ends it with her when he thinks that she's weird.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, dude, you've been weird this whole time.
Right. But that, I guess, so the way that I perceived it was that his character was meant to show her, like, detachment and lack of desire to be, like, close to another person and all of that. But the thing was, like, nobody would be not detached hanging out with that guy. Nobody would want to be close to that guy. Like, he had no game. He was pushy. He was awkward. Wasn't that attractive. I'd say he was like a Kansas 6. And it was just like, to me, kind of the point was lost that they were trying to develop about her, because he was just so slimy and gross.
Yeah.
Which,
I mean, she has the famous line. I'm saying it's a famous line. Not a famous line, but the most relatable line I've ever heard in a movie, which was, I have no desire for close company of others.
Yeah.
She told that to someone, and I was like, hell yeah, man. Me too.
Yeah. But yeah, I guess, and sort of how the movie was trying to be scarier, or sort of the overall thing of it was, she was in the car wreck, and then she was the sole survivor who had gotten out. And then she is walking away, but she seems almost like shaken, like she just wants to get away from everybody. And you don't really know if that's a new thing or if that's just how she's always been. But then she leaves and goes to the next town to try out, for this job of playing the organ at the church. But she's seeing this, like, ghostly guy in the background a lot, and other people don't see him. And then she is also having these freakouts where, like, all of a sudden no one can see her and she can't hear anything, and it's almost like she's in a different plane of existence or something. Meanwhile, in the background, there's this super creepy abandoned carnival pavilion that she's passed. Mm-hmm. And I really liked the way that they showed that she was just becoming kind of more and more obsessed with it. And there was the one scene where she goes and sees the doctor, who's telling her it's all in her head. And it seems like very sensible, and they're like, talking through it. And she's like, you know what? You're right. This is all in my head. I mean, like, I really should just probably go out to that old unsafe abandoned carnival tent by myself. And you're like, that makes no sense. But it makes her seem crazier, and it makes her seem almost like entranced by it. Right. Like, it's this inevitable thing that is coming. And so you have kind of the discomfort of that, and she keeps sort of setting out on that path, but then people will be like, no, don't do that. Well, let me go with you if you're going to go, but she doesn't seem to want to. And then eventually she sort of embraces it and is out there and then disappears. And then, very predictably, but also a good ending, they pull the car out of the river and they find that her body was still in there with the other women the whole time. So it's just kind of like a creepy, weird, slow burn that sort of pays off in the end. And they didn't go over the top to try and explain what was happening to her, but they gave you just enough narrative framework to sort of fill it in to a point that it wasn't frustrating, I thought.
Yeah, I think for me, it was almost like it was almost confusing at times. Like, just from watching movies, like, I just knew that would, I don't know, you knew that had to be the case, like that she was
The
dead.
ending, yeah.
Yeah, and so what was kind of confusing me, so I was thinking about this, and I was like, well, how come some people can see her and some people can't see her, and all that? And I got to thinking that I wondered if this movie was basically like her running away from death, like, and then, which, I mean, everyone might think this, but her running away from death, and then it finally caught up to her, which is, when then they pulled the car out. But I don't know. Still, that doesn't make sense. Yeah, it was kind of confusing how they were able to talk to her sometimes and not other times.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that it was, just sort of like the inevitability of death, and how, like, when it's your time, you can't escape it, and you may delay, but that's still the thing that's at the end of the line for all of us. So
yeah.
So nice, positive, happy way to end the conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, this movie definitely had some creepy scenes. I think they did really good with, like, the zombie ghoul things coming out of the water. At times were pretty creepy, and like even like the organ music with them dancing and just all that added together, it definitely it doesn't necessarily make sense why it didn't do too well in the box office, especially back then, but
well, and I'm sure it didn't have much advertising, and probably didn't have a very wide distribution either at the time.
That's true. And it was also before the zombie craze.
Yeah fair.
So
yeah, I mean, to me, it worked as like an extended episode of The Twilight Zone. Like, it was a very, very in line with that, which I think was more like the type of creepy stuff that was popular back then.
Yeah, specifically, like, so a lot, not a lot, but some of the things I read was, mentioning Twilight Zone, and one that kept showing up over and over was The Hitchhiker. Twilight Zone's episode, The Hitchhiker, is real similar to this, and it came out in 1960. Nice. But it was well done. I definitely enjoyed it. I definitely want to watch the remake now.
Yeah, I do too. Yeah, I'm really curious to see what route they take with that. If they try to make it into like a big, full-blown like Hollywood production, if they're trying to give it the Jennifer Beal Texas Chainsaw treatment, or if it's more like kind of staying true to form and keeping it a little more artistic and subtle. But
and I actually read where Sidney Berger, I think was his name, John. I think he has a role in this movie. It's not, he doesn't play John. I think he plays a doctor or something like that. But so
nice. Yeah, another thing I read, and I had it here in my notes, and it just didn't really fit into any other parts, but I guess when they sent it to theaters, it was like a certain length, but then when they distributed it for television, it was still on like actual reels, like film. And so people, for whatever TV broadcast, had to cut it down to fit certain time lengths. So there's a bunch of different copies of this movie out there that are all a different length, because different scenes got cut out of each of them depending on who was doing the editing and where they were showing it. And I think that probably had something to do with it being like public domain in the US, because there was no like standard, this is our work of art that we've licensed and you have to show it this way. It was like people just kind of could work with it for whatever purpose they wanted. So it's one of the things I was reading was saying that the copies of this that are still like physical copies in existence are different lengths, which is just kind of crazy to think about.
Yeah, that's well, that kind of makes sense, because in the one I watched, so I watched it on like this Classics app. It was it as soon as they pulled the car out and it showed that all three of them were in there, it just immediately ended like that. And I was like, that might not be normal, but there were no like ending credits or anything. Right. Yeah, it was just over. So
mine was weird because when it started, it was just like the guy driving the car. I mean, like there was no like distributor or production company logo or any of those things you're accustomed to at the beginning of a movie. It was just like the Amazon TV show preview ended, and it was immediately like loud with the guy in the car
talking. So
same. But yeah, overall, very pleasantly surprised by this. I liked this movie a lot. It's one that I definitely want to watch again, and I think it did a lot of things really well. And it was one where the more I read about it, the more I was intrigued by it. So
Yeah. Definitely one I was, if all we got out of this movie was this list, I'm happy with it.
You mean if all we got out of the list was this movie?
No. Did I fucking stutter? Sorry. Yeah.
Stanley, conference room now.
If all we got out of this list was that movie, then I'm cool with it.
Yep.
I still got hope. Maybe from 21 on we'll be good.
Yeah. I mean, lots of things that have happened so far would make that seem likely.
Nothing has proven otherwise.
Yeah. And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com, or feel free to comment on or message our Facebook page. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.
Traveling South Africa. South America.